So for our next big story, the one you've all been waiting for. I know. I didn't make as big of an announcement about this one. Gee, I wonder why. This is the Crytek versus Star Citizen lawsuit. Cloud Imperium Games and Robert Space Industries. And this is the reply memo in support of defendants' motion to dismiss Crytek's First Amendment complaint. Defendants, again, being Star Citizen. And we've seen some of this already, so I'm going to skip right to the introduction.